There was a moment, a heartbeat in eternity, when everything could have changed. If he had not fallen, if the Emperor had never died, what would the galaxy have become? No corpse on a throne. No prayers to a silent God. Only his gaze, eternal, burning, unending dot, but power without death, is a curse of its own. Because even immortality can rot, and even the brightest light can cast the darkest shadow. This is the world that could have been. A universe where the Emperor still walks, and humanity learns what true devotion means. They say his sacrifice saved mankind, that he gave his body to the throne and his soul to eternity, so that humanity might endure one more day in a universe built for extinction. But what if he never died? What if the Emperor never ascended, never burned, never bled, never became the still corpse God whispered to by priests in candlelight? What if he remained? The thought alone would be enough to break the mind of any mortal, and yet, somewhere between the pulse of prayer and the static of faith, that question still hums. Because the Emperor's will was too vast, too absolute, too heavy for even death to claim. He was not a man who could die. He was an idea that refused to fade. And so, in this reality, the golden throne did not consume him, it obeyed. The machinery bent to his will, metal reshaped into nerve, circuitry became thought. The agony of 10,000 years never came, for he was awake. Watching, aware, enduring, the Imperium rejoiced. Billions wept as his voice echoed once more through the halls of Terra. Planets fell to their knees. The Mechanicus sang hymns of perfect praise. The Ecclesiarchy declared the age of eternal salvation. And for the first time in history, the galaxy was silent. But that silence was not peace. It was obedience. The Emperor spoke, and his words were truth. Reality itself bent beneath the weight of his decree. The warp shuddered. The gods trembled. The veil between soul and machine thinned, and his mind stretched across a million worlds no longer chained to myth. He ruled directly. His orders flowed like data through every shrine, every auspex, every mind. His gaze reached beyond flesh, piercing the hearts of his subjects, stripping away doubt, will, emotion, and for a time, it worked. Wars ceased. The traitor legions burned in their own madness. Xeno's empires collapsed beneath the radiance of his unending light. The galaxy became quiet, structured, pure, but perfection carries a price, and this perfection was born of fear. On holy Terra, the sky never darkened again. Golden light covered every surface, banishing shadow, yet suffocating the air itself. The people knelt in endless worship, not because they believed, but because they had to. His presence filled their minds like a divine storm, leaving no room for thought, no space for the small trembling voice that once whispered, "Why?" Faith became submission. Hope became silence. The Emperor's face was no longer seen in fresco or statue. It was imprinted within the mind of every human being. Wherever one looked, his eyes stared back, endless, burning, merciful and merciless at once. His voice became the hum of existence itself, constant, calm, unrelenting. To live under his rule was to drown in light. Across the Imperium, psychers began to crumble beneath the psychic weight of his attention. Some burned from within. Others spoke prophecies no one could hear, their tongues scorched by truth. The astropaths no longer needed to send messages, for he was the message, a living current connecting every human soul. Even the warp grew quiet. The four great powers, Korn, Tzeentch, Nurgle, Slaanesh, felt the weight of his dominion. For the Emperor's light did not cleanse. It starved. Without emotion, the warp withered, its screaming rivers reduced to stagnant seas of dying thought. It should have been a victory. It should have been salvation. But what is humanity without chaos? Without fear? Without choice? The people became perfect, Yes, but perfection is sterile. The Imperium became eternal, but eternity is hollow dot in the glow of his rule. Love meant nothing, laughter was forgotten, and sorrow became obsolete. The arts vanished, replaced by hymns of logic. No poets, no dreamers, no heretics, only function, precision, worship. And through it all, the Emperor watched. He did not sleep. He did not rest. He simply was. His mind expanded beyond what was once human. He saw the entire galaxy at once, every world, every life, every heartbeat. He felt the pulse of humanity as one body, his creation unified at last. But within that unity, there was no soul. Only reflection. Sometimes, deep within the electric quiet of the throne, the Emperor remembers. He sees a flash of faces, warriors laughing before battle, a child crying beneath a crimson sky, a son calling him Father. And for a single moment, he almost feels sorrow. But then the machine whispers back, soothing him, reminding him of order, of destiny, of perfection. The galaxy remains still, shining under his eternal gaze, flawless, unchanging. Dead, because in a universe where the Emperor never died, nothing else truly lives. Horus fell. The War Master's final breath was a storm that tore across the Imperium, a howl of hatred that echoed for 1,000 years. His body, once a vessel of glory, lay broken and twisted at the feet of the Emperor. The bridge of the vengeful spirit burned, the metal groaning like a dying god. And yet, the Emperor did not fall beside him. He remained standing, silent and alive, his armor bleeding light instead of blood. His face was not triumph, it was sorrow carved in gold. Around him, the air trembled. The warp screamed. The gods recoiled. And for the first time since creation, the powers of chaos knew fear. Terra watched the sky ignite. The storm clouds parted, and his radiance broke through the ash and ruin. To the billions below, it was as if the sun itself had returned from death. The people wept, not from joy, but from something far deeper, awe, terror, and the unbearable knowledge that they were now seen. Every thought, every sin, every secret in their hearts was laid bare under his living gaze. Across the Imperium, the word spread faster than light, he lives. The Master of Mankind walks again. And with that single truth, the age of faith was shattered before it could begin. There was no need for prayer now. There was no corpse to worship, no throne to kneel before. There was only his command, clear and absolute. The traitor legions, scattered and broken, fled into the eye of terror, hunted like beasts. The loyalists followed, their armor scorched, their souls hollowed by the horror they had seen. No mercy was given. No surrender accepted. The sons of Horus were purged, their homeworlds turned to black glass. The Emperor decreed it so that no record shall remain. No name shall be spoken. And so an entire generation of warriors, both loyal and lost, vanished from history. Planets burned in silence, their skies red with the light of cleansing fire. The screams of billions were drowned by the chanting of servitors, engraving new laws into stone. Loyalty without question. Service without end. The Imperium did not crumble after the heresy, it solidified. The fear of the unknown was replaced by the certainty of his rule. The High Lords bowed lower than ever before. The Mechanicum swore again their fealty. Even the Primarchs, those demigod sons, felt their knees weaken before his unbroken presence. But it was not victory that filled the air, it was silence. The kind of silence that follows after a scream too long and too loud. The kind of silence that suffocates. The Emperor had survived, yes. But so had the shadow of what he had done, on 1,000 worlds. Citizens celebrated his endurance, yet their joy was laced with unease. They built monuments not out of faith, but out of fear. They sang hymns of praise not from love, but from necessity. For now they understood that the Emperor did not need worshippers. He needed witnesses, His legions became his eyes, his generals his hands. His presence lingered in every order, every broadcast, every banner that fluttered under crimson skies. To defy him was not just rebellion, it was blasphemy against the living will of humanity. And yet, behind the obedience, behind the endless parades and the hollow cheers, there was something rotten. Those who fought beside him whispered that he had changed, that the man who once sought to unite mankind now sought only control, that the warmth of his light had dimmed, leaving behind only the burn. The Emperor no longer spoke of destiny, or enlightenment, or hope. He spoke of order. And order came, swift and merciless. Across the void, the remnants of chaos fled deeper into the warp. Their screams echoed faintly through the veil, promising revenge. But none dared to listen. None except those who remembered what the Emperor once was, and what he might be becoming. The Imperium was reborn in gold and shadow. Cities rebuilt faster than they had fallen. Armies doubled. Fleets multiplied. The banners of humanity rose higher than ever. But in the quiet hours, when the lights dimmed and the Vox hymns ceased, the people whispered to each other, "He lives. He never sleeps. He watches everything." And in that whisper, you could hear it, the first note of fear. The beginning of the new age. The Emperor had triumphed over death. But the Imperium had traded one kind of damnation for another. The golden throne stood silent. Its machinery hummed softly in the dark, ancient gears untouched, waiting for a master who no longer needed it. The Emperor still walked, and the great machine once meant to preserve his dying body became a monument to what might have been. Dust gathered on its golden steps. The priests who once prayed around it stared at their hands, uncertain of their purpose. The light they had once worshipped now walked among them, alive, watching, judging. The Astronomicon still burned, brighter than ever, not through sacrifice, but through his living will. A pulsive psychic fire that spread across the galaxy, sharp, cold, absolute. It illuminated the void like a sun that never set. But it was not the warmth of dawn. It was the glare of an empire that no longer slept. Terra itself became a temple of silence. The people dared not speak his name. Not in praise, not in defiance. To call him God was forbidden. To call him man was unthinkable. He was simply him, the center of all gravity, the axis of human fear. Where once the cries of devotion filled the cathedrals, now there was only the hum of machinery and the echo of his footsteps. The custodies no longer guarded a tomb. They guarded a living God who denied his divinity. Their golden armor reflected his light, their faces expressionless behind masks that never turned away. They spoke only in whispers, not to pray, but to survive the weight of his presence. Even they, the Emperor's chosen, could not look at him for long. His gaze was like the surface of a dying sun, too bright, too vast, too knowing. The ecclesiarchy, that great church that might have ruled the hearts of men, never rose. The dream of worship died before it began. The Emperor himself decreed, "There shall be no gods." His voice, a thunder that cracked through every broadcast channel, every Vox line, every planet under his domain. And yet, as those words spread through the stars, billions of souls shivered. For if he was not a god, what was he? On shrine worlds that no longer had purpose, the faithful tore down their icons and wept. Some screamed that he was a liar. Others carved his symbol into their flesh and begged forgiveness. Entire cities burned themselves to ash rather than live in a world where faith was a crime. The Emperor did not intervene. He simply watched, unblinking, as humanity purified itself in the flames of his truth. In the great halls of Terra, servitors dismantled the statues of saints that had never lived. Monuments of marble were replaced with obsidian towers carved with a single phrase, "Obedience is truth." The air filled with the smell of burnt incense and oil. The old ways, prayer, hope, devotion, were erased like heresy. What remained was silence, order, and the cold perfection of logic. And yet, deep within the underhives, in the cracks of the great cities, the whispers returned. People still lit candles in secret, small flames hidden behind scrap metal walls. They no longer prayed to a god, they prayed to a memory. Mothers whispered stories of the emperor's sacrifice, of how he once died for mankind. They knew the truth was forbidden, but truth had become a myth of its own. The fear of him only made the faith stronger. The administratum issued new decrees daily. Words like faith, hope, and miracle were banned from every lexicon. Vox transmissions were filtered for forbidden phrases. To even think of the emperor as divine was treason punishable by vaporization. Billions obeyed. Millions disappeared. And still, the whispers grew. Because you cannot outlaw belief, you can only drive it deeper. His words burned Mars. Factories erupted in rebellion. Priests set themselves ablaze in sacred defiance. The skies of the red planet turned black with smoke. The war lasted 1,000 days, and when it ended, there were no priests left, only machines. The forges glowed brighter than ever, but without faith, the sound of their work changed. No longer hymns of creation, but screams of purpose, mechanical, endless, hollow. The emperor had achieved what he desired, a galaxy without gods, without delusion, without hope. Humanity had been purified into obedience. The age of reason had triumphed. He stood before the empty golden throne and stared into its hollow seat. Once it had been his cage, his curse, his destiny. Now it was a mirror, showing him what he had become. A being of infinite power and infinite loneliness. The machine meant to preserve him would never be needed. For he no longer feared death, but death might have been the last part of him that was still human. The fires of Mars had not yet cooled when the Emperor's decree spread across the galaxy. The imperial truth, the creed of logic, reason, and disbelief, returned like a knife to the throat of every faith that had dared to grow. Worlds that had once prayed now knelt in silence. Temples became archives, and priests became record keepers. Humanity was no longer allowed to believe, only to obey. The age of reason, once lost to heresy and war, was resurrected under his living will. Yet there was no joy in this resurrection, no hope. It came like a storm of ash, cold, relentless, and absolute. Across the stars, the Emperor's voice echoed, "There are no gods. There is only man." But the word man no longer meant what it once did. It no longer meant flesh and heart. It meant obedience. It meant silence. It meant fear. Entire planets were purged of superstition. Cathedrals were dismantled stone by stone. Libraries were filled with censored history, rewritten to erase the myths of sacrifice and redemption. Children were taught that faith was the root of weakness, that hope was a disease of the ignorant. The sermons of old became lessons in rational cruelty. And through it all, the Emperor watched, expressionless, as the galaxy bent itself into shape under his eternal gaze. But the truth that survived was not the one he had intended. The imperial truth endured, yes, but it was no longer truth. It had mutated into a doctrine of fear, enforced not by conviction but by terror. People repeated his words because they were afraid to forget them. They obeyed reason because punishment was madness. The empire of logic had become an empire of silence. The Inquisition, once born from paranoia and devotion, transformed into a machine of ideological purity. No longer hunting witches or heretics, they hunted believers. They burned entire settlements for whispering old prayers. They erased families who dared to light a candle in remembrance of a God that never was. The smell of burnt flesh mixed with the scent of holy oil, and still the Emperor did not intervene. On 1,000 worlds, men built monuments not to worship, but to remember what worship felt like. Monoliths of black glass stood in desolate plazas, reflecting nothing but emptiness. Inscribed upon them were the words, "Truth endures." And in the reflection of those cold surfaces, people saw not truth, but the hollow eyes of a race that had forgotten why it existed. The Emperor's image was everywhere. On every screen, in every city, projected across the void, not as a symbol of faith, but of order. His voice dictated, corrected, commanded. And yet, with each broadcast, something human slipped away from him. He had become less of a savior and more of a system, a living machine of control. A consciousness spread thin across 1,000,000,000,000 souls. His presence was infinite, but his touch was gone. Some say he began to forget the sound of laughter, that he wandered the silent halls of the imperial palace at night, where no one dared follow, tracing his hand across the walls as if searching for something that had been erased. Perhaps he sought the memory of his sons, those who had once called him father. Or perhaps he was searching for the last trace of his own humanity, for even as the imperial truth endured, its architect began to fade. The Emperor, who had once sacrificed everything for mankind's freedom, now ruled a species that no longer knew what freedom meant. They were logical, efficient, and dead inside. The stars burned cold, and the galaxy became a machine that no longer needed a soul. And in that cold order, in that perfect silence, the whispers returned again. Not of chaos, but of longing. People began to dream of something beyond reason. Something forbidden. A spark of warmth in the endless dark. A feeling that reason could not name. The Emperor heard those dreams. He saw them flicker in the warp like dying embers. And for the first time in millennia, he hesitated. Because the truth that endures is not the one you build, it's the one that survives you. And somewhere deep within him, beneath the armor, beneath the godhood, beneath the logic that had consumed him, a human heartbeat still trembled, but it was faint. So faint that not even he could tell if it was his own, or the echo of a world that had once prayed for him to die. The red planet bled. Its skies, once a dull rust, now burned with a light that should never have been seen by mortal eyes. When the Emperor turned his gaze upon Mars, the machine god trembled, for in his living presence, all lesser gods were unmade. The priests of the Mechanicum, who had built their empire upon faith disguised as logic, faced a truth sharper than any blade. There was no Omnissiah. There was only him. The forges fell silent in reverence and fear. Servitors froze mid-task as the air filled with static vox lines, bursting into screams of binary prayer. The Magi knelt before their terminals, whispering corrupted code like desperate psalms, begging their god of metal to answer. But the void remained silent. The machine spirit, that sacred lie that had fueled 10,000 years of devotion, was dead. And the Emperor, in his radiance, spoke only once. You were meant to build. Instead you worshipped. Those words broke Mars. Half the planet fell to its knees, half raised its weapons in rebellion. The red plains erupted into civil war, metal against metal, machine against machine. Titan legions marched across oceans of molten steel, their cannons turning cities into shadows. Skittery legions fought each other in endless circuits of loyalty and doubt. Some fought for the old faith, others for the new truth. But in the end, both fought for survival. The Emperor watched from orbit, his eyes cold, distant, unreadable. He did not descend. He did not command. He simply waited. For this was not punishment. It was purification. Those who clung to faith would be burned out. Those who adapted would endure. The age of the machine god had ended. The age of the living logic had begun. In the deepest forges, where heat melted steel into rivers of light, the last fabricator general stood before the sacred cogitator core. His robes were tattered, his flesh more iron than blood. Around him, the last of his priests wept oil tears as the Emperor's presence filled their circuits. The fabricator's voice cracked like grinding gears as he spoke his final command: delete the Omnissiah. And with that, 1,000 years of worship vanished in a single line of code. The mechanicum that emerged was no longer a religion. It was a machine, perfect, efficient, merciless. The new Mars served not out of devotion, but design. Its forges no longer sang hymns of praise. They screamed with the rhythm of creation. Where once stood temples, now rose cold towers of computation, their walls carved with the Emperor's command. Knowledge is obedience. Yet, even among the loyal, something unnatural grew. The absence of faith did not bring peace. It brought hunger. Without belief, the Magi sought meaning in perfection, and perfection demanded sacrifice. Flesh was purged, replaced with unfeeling metal. Thought was purified until it became code. The more they served logic, the less they remembered life. Deep in the tunnels beneath Mars, among the buried cathedrals of rust, a few survivors still whispered the name Omnicia in secret. They spoke of the old ways, of spirits in the machines, of prayers that once healed engines and calmed data wraiths. They were hunted, dissected, and displayed as examples of weakness, but their whispers refused to die. In the dark, the sound of turning gears still carried a heartbeat. And somewhere, in the core of the red planet, beneath layers of forgotten code and the wreckage of civil war, something stirred. A fragment of the old machine god, silent, fractured, waiting. Perhaps it was not dead. Perhaps it was simply dreaming. The Emperor's fleet left Mars in silence. From the void, he watched the red planet burn itself clean. When the fires died, the surface glowed like glass, flawless and empty. The mechanicum had been reborn, obedient, loyal, stripped of faith. But as he turned away, his reflection flickered across the void, and for a moment, the stars themselves seemed to pulse like living circuits. In that pulse was something almost human, a memory, a regret, or perhaps a question he could not silence. He had destroyed every false god. And yet, as Mars spun beneath him, he realized the most terrible truth of all. In trying to erase faith, he had made himself the only god that remained. The throne no longer hums. It breathes. What was once a machine of golden divinity has become something else entirely, a pulsing, living monument that drinks light and exhales darkness. The air around it vibrates with the rhythm of something vast and awake. The Emperor no longer sits upon his throne. He's the throne. His body, once frail and forgotten beneath relics of gold and wire, now stretches like veins through the machinery. His will etched into every circuit, every pulse of psychic current. Across Terra, the Adeptus Custodes kneel in silence. The priests of the ecclesiarchy weep, not from joy but terror. They have prayed for 10,000 years for his return, but none imagined this. The Emperor's presence now fills every hall of the imperial palace like a scent, thick, metallic, and suffocating. The statues of saints and heroes begin to weep molten gold, their eyes glowing faintly as if the Emperor looks through them. The faithful believe it to be a miracle. The wise call it infection. The imperial tarot no longer speaks. Astropaths burn out in silence, their souls swallowed before they can even scream. The warp itself seems to recoil from Terra, its tides twisting in fear. As if something older than chaos has opened its eyes, and throughout the Imperium, strange phenomena spread like wildfire. On shrine worlds, holy relics begin to bleed golden ichor. Planetary governors awaken from sleep screaming the same words. He is awake. On faraway hive worlds, billions of citizens collapse mid-prayer, their minds suddenly filled with an impossible image, a vast, burning face staring directly at them through the void. Ships traveling the warp experience days of utter stillness. The immaterium frozen like glass, every demon voice silenced. Every soul held in suspension between breath and thought. For a fleeting moment, the galaxy is quiet. And then, it screams. The Emperor's light bursts forth from Terra like a golden storm, sweeping across the stars. It carries not salvation, but command. Worlds fall to their knees in rapture and terror, their skies turning to fire as the Astronomicon burns brighter than ever before, so bright it blinds those who dare gaze upon it. Planets near the core report their oceans boiling under the weight of psychic radiance. The fabric of reality trembles, unable to bear the pressure of a god's awakening. The Mechanicus calls it divine resurgence. The Inquisition calls it the second heresy. For humanity, it is neither miracle nor blasphemy. It is the end of all freedom. Every thought, every prayer, every spark of faith now bends toward the throne. The Emperor's will flows like a current through the souls of men. The devout become puppets of radiant zeal, moving in perfect synchronicity. Soldiers march without command. Priests chant words they never learned. Civilians paint his sigil upon their skin and tear out their eyes so that they may see only him. And beneath it all, a single truth grows clear. The Emperor has not returned to save mankind. He has returned to claim it. The golden throne now radiates an energy that distorts matter and mind alike. Flesh blossoms into metal. Voices merge into one vast droning hymn. The palace itself warps into a living cathedral of bone and gold, its corridors twisting into endless spirals of worship. The Emperor's thoughts echo through every wall, not his words, but his feelings, hunger, command, and something deeper. A grief so immense it feels like gravity. Some among the custodes whisper of seeing. His face takes shape in the throne's surface, half divine, half decayed. When they speak of it, their armor begins to rust, and their eyes glow faintly with golden light. None dare question what is happening. None dare call it wrong. The Emperor's power now stretches beyond the warp. His psychic essence seeps into the stars themselves. Even dead worlds begin to hum faintly with the rhythm of his heartbeat. The Chaos Gods, silent for the first time in eternity, retreat, not in fear, but in fascination. They feel the shape of something unfamiliar forming within reality, a god not born of emotion, but of collective submission, the ultimate reflection of human faith turned inward until it becomes tyranny incarnate. The Imperium celebrates its salvation. Processions fill the streets. Banners proclaim, "He lives eternal." For the first time in history, there's no separation between the Emperor and mankind. There's only the throne, breathing, pulsing, endlessly alive, and the endless chorus of souls singing within it, in the silence between breaths. One can almost hear the echo of his final mercy. You prayed for my return. You did not understand what that meant. They say the sons of the Emperor were forged from his divine will, weapons carved from light and shadow, sent to bring unity to a fractured humanity. But under his living rule, their destinies were rewritten in blood. When the final battle ended, and Horus fell screaming into oblivion, the surviving Primarchs knelt before their father, not in loyalty, but in fear. For they saw what he had become. The Emperor no longer spoke as a man. His words were law-given voice, his presence a storm of psychic fire that devoured doubt and thought alike. And though they called him father, there was nothing human left in his gaze. Robert Guilliman was the first to rebuild, reforging the Imperium under the Emperor's command. His every decree was absolute, his ultramarines spreading order like the breath of a machine. Worlds burned for efficiency, not heresy. Humanity was streamlined, purified, until every soul was an obedient gear in the divine engine. Lemon, Russ roared against the silence of control. He saw the Emperor's perfection as a cage, a slow death of the spirit. But when he raised his blade, the sky itself turned to fire. The Emperor's will crushed him, not with wrath, but with pity. Russ vanished into the warp, not as punishment, but as a reminder. No son may defy his father and remain whole. The others learned. Perturabo forged fortresses so perfect that even demons could not breach them. Yet his eyes were hollow, his soul bound to endless construction. Dorn rebuilt the palace itself, brick by brick, bone by bone, while chanting the Emperor's name until his voice turned to dust. Vulcan wandered the slave worlds of the Imperium, a saint of mercy in a realm that had forgotten what mercy meant, and in the deep void, Angron's chains still clattered. The Emperor did not kill him, he reshaped him. The butcher's nails were silenced, replaced by psychic control so absolute that Angron's fury became prayer. Where once he roared for freedom, now he knelt in eternal devotion. His eyes glowing with gold instead of red. They became the choir of gods, 10,000-year generals who no longer dreamed, who no longer aged, who no longer questioned. Each one a fragment of the Emperor's endless mind. Each one a reflection of his will, singing in perfect, terrible harmony. The galaxy entered a golden age, or what seemed like one. The Xenos were exterminated. Chaos retreated. Warp travel became stable. But peace, in the Imperium, was never peace, only silence before the scream. Because beneath this perfection, something was dying. Humanity itself, without rebellion, without error, without choice, the species stagnated. Every emotion became ritual, every thought a repetition of ancient words. The ecclesiarchy no longer prayed to a corpse, they prayed to a presence that answered. But those answers came in whispers too loud to bear. Cities burned not because of heresy, but because mortals could not contain the weight of his truth. The Primarchs saw this rot spreading, and still, they obeyed. Their hands built monuments they hated. Their voices echoed sermons they no longer believed. For to defy him was to vanish, as Russ did, or worse, to become part of him. And yet, deep in their hollow hearts, something human still stirred. Sanguinius's sacrifice was undone. He was reborn by the Emperor's will, his wings of white replaced with wings of light, his eyes eternally weeping molten gold. He led the choir in hymns that shattered the veil between reality and nightmare. And when he sang, mortals fell to their knees, not in awe, but in terror. They were gods, yes, but gods on strings. And the strings were made of faith. Then came the moment none dared name. In the warp, something shifted. The four gods, beaten, contained, humiliated, watched the Emperor's Imperium of perfection and smiled. Because they saw what he could not. His order was their nourishment. His dominion fed their hunger. For every soul he silenced, another echo of despair rippled through the immaterium. Every prayer spoken in perfect obedience was a spark of blind fear, and chaos fed on fear. Most of all, the Emperor ruled. The Primarchs obeyed. The Imperium endured. And chaos laughed. The Emperor did not answer in words. The stars themselves dimmed, and the Astronomicon pulsed once, as if the galaxy had taken a breath. It could no longer release. And somewhere beyond the light, the laughter grew louder. Because even gods can become prisoners of their own perfection. And even the Emperor, in his eternal rule, could not see that the cage he built for chaos was now the cage that held them all. Perfection. That was the word the Emperor whispered across the stars, not as hope, but as command. And the galaxy obeyed. The Imperium no longer needed armies that bled, priests that preached, or saints that burned. Every soul was catalogued, weighed, measured, and shaped. Cities became living circuits. Worlds transformed into shrines of function. No sound of rebellion, no word of faith, only obedience, echoing endlessly through corridors of metal and bone. The Primarchs ruled like demigods, their hands guided by his will. Guilliman's reforms spread until every planet mirrored the next. Perfect efficiency, perfect devotion, perfect silence. Human life became a pattern repeated 1 trillion times, identical from hive to hive, system to system. And above it all, the Emperor watched. He no longer needed to speak. His thoughts resonated through every mind in the Imperium, a constant whisper of unity that drowned individuality. To question was to cease existing. To dream was to burn. To feel was to fall into madness. For 1,000 years, there was peace, the kind of peace that comes only after the death of everything that makes one alive. The Mechanicus became obsolete. The Emperor himself was the machine god now, omnipresent, omnipotent, unfeeling. Forge worlds became temples of data and light, where tech priests no longer prayed to Omnissiah, but processed his code directly into their neural flesh. Metal and spirit fused until the distinction between man and machine was no longer known. And yet, despite this supposed perfection, cracks began to form on distant worlds. Flickers of emotion, a child's laughter, a mother's grief, caused cities to glitch, machines to shudder. The Emperor's perfection could not comprehend love or sorrow or hope. His system treated them as corruption, flaws to be erased. Entire populations vanished overnight, rewritten into obedient data. Their memories stored, their faces forgotten. The galaxy glittered, cold and beautiful, like a tomb made of stars. There were no wars, only purges. No faith, only programming. The ecclesiarchy chanted digital hymns, their voices layered with vox distortion and static hallelujahs. The Imperial Guard no longer marched. They moved, faceless, mechanical, coordinated as extensions of his will. The Emperor had done it. He had killed chaos. He had killed fear. He had killed everything, but he had also killed humanity. The Primarchs, though immortal, began to fracture under the weight of his mind. Guilliman's face froze in a perpetual expression of pride that felt more like despair. Vulcan's mercy decayed into routine. Mortarian's penance became endless cleansing, purifying until there was nothing left to cleanse. Even Sanguinius, radiant, eternal, began to fall silent. His tears dried. His wings dimmed. His hymns turned hollow. And when he sang one final time, the sound echoed through the warp, a note so pure that even demons wept. The warp itself grew still, its tides frozen beneath the Emperor's psychic domination. The Chaos Gods slumbered, their laughter silenced. But in that silence, something older stirred, something born from the void between perfection and decay. The echo of the human soul that refused to die, they called it. The quiet rebellion. It began with a whisper on a forgotten world, a worker humming a song no longer permitted. Then another joined, and another. No one knew the words, but they all remembered the feeling. That was enough. The Emperor's light dimmed for a heartbeat, just long enough for the universe to remember what shadow felt like. Across the Imperium, citizens began dreaming again. Dreaming of chaos. Dreaming of freedom. When the Emperor felt it, his wrath was unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Stars imploded, time fractured. Reality cracked under the sheer weight of his fury. He reached into every mind, tearing away memory and will, rewriting the species he had once sought to protect. He would perfect them once more, erase the flaw of humanity itself. But something resisted. In the depths of his own psychic reflection, he saw it, a human face. Not divine, not holy, just human. It was his own. The man he used to be, before the throne, before the godhood, before the madness. And for one fleeting moment, the Emperor hesitated. In that hesitation, the galaxy breathed again. Planets screamed with life. Chaos flooded the void. The warp reignited, not as enemy, but as reflection. Because perfection can never last. Because even gods must break. And so the Imperium shattered, not with war, but with awakening. The golden light cracked like glass, and through the fractures poured the color of feeling. The chaos of being alive. The Emperor's perfection dissolved into infinite fragments, scattered through every living soul. His voice faded, not in defeat, but in weary surrender. And somewhere, among the burning stars, humanity began again, imperfect, afraid, alive. They once prayed. They once whispered to the stars, to saints and spirits, to the emperor who bled for them. But now, no one prays anymore. There are still cathedrals, of course, towering structures of black marble and living steel. Candles still burn, hymns still echo, and choirs still sing, but there is no faith in their sound. Only rhythm. Only obedience. Where once the ecclesiarchy spoke of miracles, now they recite protocols. Scripture has become code, verses transformed into sequences of command. Priests no longer weep in awe. They smile mechanically as they lead their congregations in perfect synchronicity. Every gesture is measured, every breath timed, every tear rehearsed. The emperor still reigns, his light filling the galaxy, but it is not love that sustains him, it is control. Faith, in its purest form, is unpredictable. It questions, it hopes, it feels. And feeling is dangerous in a world built on perfection. So he remade it. Worship became regulation. Devotion became duty. Every act of belief reduced to repetition. Every soul calibrated to serve without thought. On Terra, the grand basilica of light stretches from the throne's shadow to the edge of the atmosphere. Billions of believers kneel in unison, their movements precise as clockwork, their voices identical. From orbit, their chants form patterns, geometric waves of obedience that resonate through the void. Even the stars seem to pulse in rhythm. But beneath that harmony lies silence. Not peace, silence. For those who still feel faith, who still dream of the warmth it once carried, are unmade. Not punished. Not exiled, simply rewritten. Their memories folded back into the emperor's will until they no longer remember why they believed. Only that they must obey. The Inquisition became the choir of correction. No longer hunters of heresy, they are architects of unity. They walk among the crowds unseen, rewriting thoughts before they are spoken, smoothing emotions before they take form. To resist is to vanish, not in fire, but in forgetfulness. On distant shrine worlds, statues of saints stand hollow-eyed, their features polished smooth by machine hands. The names of martyrs are erased, their sacrifices replaced by a single phrase etched in every temple: perfection is worship. And so humanity obeys. They no longer beg for salvation. They no longer question judgment. They no longer remember why they once feared the dark. Because in the Emperor's empire of light, there is no dark. There is only illumination so constant, it burns away the soul. Children are born beneath the hum of golden machines. They never hear a lullaby, only the endless drone of the Emperor's name. Their first words are not father or mother, but command. Their first prayer is a calculation. Their first dream, a system error. And yet, somewhere, hidden in the cracks between perfect systems, faint sparks still linger. A mother clutches her child and whispers a forbidden word: please. A worker stares at the sky and wonders what lies beyond the light. A preacher forgets his lines and trembles as he feels, truly feels, for the first time in his life. In those moments, the Emperor's empire trembles, for he feels it too. In his infinite mind. In the endless hum of obedience, there are ghosts of memories he cannot erase, of laughter, of warmth, of human imperfection. He remembers the faith that once burned freely, untamed and alive. And for a moment, he almost reaches for it, but the machine that is his soul will not allow it. The Imperium is too vast, too fragile, too dependent on his perfection. So he tightens his grip once more. Faith dies quietly, not in blasphemy or rebellion, but in silence. In the repetition of words that have lost their meaning. In the chanting of names no one understands. In the worship of a God who can no longer hear. And as the golden light spreads further across the stars, the last fragments of faith are buried beneath the noise. No one cries. No one questions. No one prays. Only obedience remains. And far beyond the Emperor's reach, in the endless void between galaxies, something watches. something ancient and patient, feeding on the emptiness that follows perfection, because faith, even when twisted, kept humanity alive. But obedience is death.
The galaxy is silent now. Not the silence of peace, but the suffocating stillness that follows when even death grows weary. The stars no longer burn, they glow dimly. Drained of life, their light filtered through veils of dust and worship. The void itself feels heavier, as if burdened by the memory of everything that once was. And upon the golden throne, he sits, the Emperor. The immortal, the eternal. Not dying, not living, only enduring. The throne beneath him is no longer a machine of suffering. It has become an extension of his being, a cathedral of flesh and gold intertwined. Tubes no longer feed him. He feeds the machine. His veins run with liquid light, his thoughts stretch across the stars, and his eyes, those once human eyes, glow with the radiance of dying suns. He feels everything. Every whisper, every command, every obedient breath. Trillions of souls pulse in unison with his will, like organs within a single body. The Imperium itself is no longer an empire. It is him. Planets orbit, not by gravity but by decree. Armies move before their orders are spoken. Faith flows through the cosmos's data, perfect and pure, stripped of emotion, stripped of meaning. Humanity has achieved unity. At the cost of its humanity. In every cathedral, voices chant his name without pause, but not out of love. The worship is automatic, eternal, and empty. And he knows it. He can see the faces of his people, motionless, obedient, hollow. He can taste their fear as easily as he once tasted air. He can feel the ache of every dying world, every silent prayer that was never meant to reach him. For in this perfection, there is no devotion left. Only function. He remembers what came before, faintly like the echo of a dream. The laughter of warriors, the courage of men who stood against gods, the warmth of a world not yet consumed by devotion. He remembers hope, and he hates it. Because in his infinite clarity, he understands the truth. Hope was weakness. Emotion was chaos. Love was the first betrayal. So he tore them out of the human soul and replaced them with order, flawless, precise, eternal. And in doing so, he became what he once fought against, a god of stagnation, a deity of stillness, a monument to his own failure. The warp no longer screams his name. Even chaos has grown quiet, starved of emotion, of passion, of sin. The gods of ruin crumble into shadows, forgotten by a galaxy that no longer feels enough to fear them. He has won, utterly, completely, and yet he weeps. Not with tears, but with storms. Great waves of psychic energy ripple through the void, unseen, unheard, the final fragments of a soul that once dreamed of mankind's ascension. They lash against the edges of the universe like the dying heartbeat of creation itself. He looks upon his perfect Imperium, an empire of eternal obedience, a galaxy of unbroken silence, and realizes what he has built, a tomb. Vast beyond comprehension, golden, radiant, beautiful, and utterly lifeless, the Emperor no longer guards humanity. He is humanity, embalmed within his own perfection. The people are his veins, the stars his bones, the throne his heart. The Imperium breathes, but it does not live. Somewhere in the fading edges of the galaxy, a single candle still burns. A human hand lights it, trembling, defiant, though it will never be seen. The flame flickers weakly against the dark, casting a shadow that stretches forever, for even gods cannot extinguish what they no longer understand, and so he sits, surrounded by the silence of eternity, staring into the abyss he has made. The light of his empire burns so bright that nothing else can exist, not love, not hope, not life. In that endless brilliance, he is finally alone. The Emperor never died. He only outlived everything worth saving.